So hello. To start off with, would you like to say your name and where you are right now?
Hi, so I'm Alexandra Vancevska, and I'm currently in London. It's a biomedical center where I do research on how our cells are repairing DNA when damaged.
So the first question for you is, who are you as a human being? And that, as I think you know, can be any aspect of yourself that you really want to share. I mean, it could be values, passions, whatever you'd like to bring in.
So I have a confession to make. This was the only question from the interviews I have contemplated on. And this morning I was thinking about like, how do I answer this? And I did a little bit of bibliomancy. I was like, I just opened this book and I really want to see what it writes. And what I opened was incredible. It was, you are what you know, and also so much more than that. It was really funny that I opened the page and it was this sentence. So I can share what I know, and I'm probably like everyone else, so much more than that. So basically, I always say I'm human first. So whatever I do, I try to bring that aspect of wholeness into anything else that will be a little bit more specific. So I start with that, and then I studied biochemistry, and I'm a scientist. So that's one part of my identity. I was always interested in psychotherapy and people and our souls and how we make decisions and how we behave. And therefore, I'm studying Gestalt psychotherapy in London. So I'm a student of Gestalt. I'm a sister, a daughter, a granddaughter. I'm from Balkans. It's difficult to say from Serbia because I was born in Serbia. My parents are Macedonian. I speak all the languages of the region. So it's very difficult for me to have such a strong national grounding, which is actually very prevalent in the Balkans. And I really love the region. I really, really, really love and appreciate that region. And I do yoga, and it taught me a lot about being present in my body. It gave me a sort of intimacy with my body. I also do weightlifting, and it's interesting. I always thought, or there is this notion that weightlifting and yoga and flexibility and strength don't go together. And for me, it has been an incredible making of a whole by combining these two movement practices, because both of them required a sort of mind-muscle, mind-body connection in order to actually progress and feel your body in different ways. So I think that part really kind of fueled that connection with the sensations in the body. And then I really like, and I'm learning now a lot about drawing and colors. And everything I do, I try to do it in an expressive manner, in a way that I know this sentence from a long time ago, and it always is ringing in my head, which is learn to express, not to impress. And I felt like this is where I want to act from. So whatever I do, I try to do it in a way to see how do I use a technique in order to see into myself and express something that I have inside, rather than use something as unchewed, introjected, and then express it back. So I guess
it's sort of more of an interest in process than in products.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yes. Which, as our common friend would say, is a very gestalty thing.
Okay. So what would you say that some of the values that you hold are in these different aspects of your life?
I guess integrity, Integrity is something that I really try to keep throughout everything. And I guess that's my need for wholeness is coming from that space of integrity. Curiosity is really in every aspect. It's like the common thread of everything I do. And I guess openness to new things, to new experiences, to new learnings, to differences. And I guess those three are probably the main that really perspire in any aspect I go into.
And so a little bit about your history. What would you say is an event, like a specific event or a set of circumstances in your life that have really significantly shaped who you are or how you are?
So it's interesting. This question is interesting because if you would ask me this 5 years ago, I would say the war in Serbia. Because in the 1990s, Yugoslavia fell apart, and it was a very war-stricken area with a lot of instability. And then in 1999, we were bombarded. But in a way, I always thought I had a good childhood. Like even among these circumstances, I always felt like I've experienced life. But after some time in therapy, I actually now know that maybe the event that has shaped my life the most is when my mom lost a baby during birth 6 months before I was conceived. And I think this really, I wasn't aware how much has this influenced and shaped my life, and how much most of my motivation, including choosing partners and saving partners and rescuing, and my intimate relationship with death and life, was actually really impacted by this one very, very, very strong event, which I was not aware of, or I wasn't aware when it happened, but it was part of my awareness, if that makes sense.
So sort of the field that you were born into?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And what about people? Who would you say have been sort of significant figures in these different fields who have impacted you or shaped you?
In every stage of my life, luckily, I was supported by very, very good mentors, which, as I was growing, I was overgrowing them, which was really good because I had strong figures, but then I was able to learn and take what I need and move on. So in my early years, I think it was just seeing my grandma, who is a very strong woman. Maybe it's a positively negative influence because she was very strong, but then taking things that she shouldn't, that were not her role. But there was a model of we can do hard things in her. And then I guess also my mom has a very strong impact, in the sense that she's really, really, really pragmatic. And with her, I could always be almost like a business partner. I would make jewelry, she would help me to sell it. And there was this thing of like, I was always accountable, and there was accountability. And I think I learned that from my mom. She just says, I'm going to do this, and does it. And she doesn't really think about it. It's so natural to her. So I think I got that in my early years. And then I had a mentor when I was in university, and she has the same name like me. And I think I learned from her she was my first psychotherapist unofficially. And she really supported me in this process of accepting my weirdness, accepting that the fact that I was faster, different than others. And she was fueling that speed. She was never telling me you're too fast, or if you do this, you will like miss on something. She was just giving me more and more and more. And even to the point that it was overwhelming and maybe too much for someone of my age. But I actually appreciate that, because that kept me in that zone of proximal development. So yeah, she was a very strong figure in my university days. And then in my PhD, I had incredible people. I have a Swiss family, adopted family, and my Swiss mom is a person with the most empathy I've ever met. She doesn't have a psychotherapy degree. She doesn't have any formal education in that sense, but she just feels people in a way that it was beautiful to be in her presence. And she was basically meeting a need that I haven't had met before. And with her, I really felt like I was not judging myself for the first time. She modeled how to take care of yourself in a very compassionate way. And then my ex-boss, who is he's the person who actually discovered the enzyme telomerase. And he has this incredible childlike curiosity for science. And he taught me really, he was always telling me to look for the long run, to not go for these small wins in science, because in 10 years, people will know that you haven't just done the good work. So good science really stands the test of time. And I think I got this from him. And I think now in this kind of new stage, I think my therapist, she's been absolutely transformative. I mean, I always say, I know we don't work in saving, rescuing, but she did save my life. I mean, save the most beautiful life that I imagine, not like the bare life. And I think meeting you was very transformative, because it just impacted me to have a community, and also to just do things without really having an inhibition inside, just out of curiosity, and not necessarily having it packed in a business model so that we know for sure what's going to happen with it. So it was liberating. And I think it brought very important people in my life, which I will know the importance of it only later, but I feel that there will be one now. So yeah.
Well, thank you. I certainly don't have a packaged business model to offer you.
I know.
That's for sure.
I know.
So I want to go back to something that you said. If I'd asked you 5 years ago, the war would have been significant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I kind of want to ask how so? And then the other part of me wants to say, why is it not? What changed?
So, because there was a war inside of me, and that war was what I was carrying from my family. So it was a war of me and my family, and it was also reflected in the war that was happening on the outside. Because during the war, I was not directly impacted, in the sense that, as many other people in Serbia or like the ex-Yugoslavia, I actually had a house. So some people actually lost their houses, had to flee to Canada even. I haven't had that. Although it impacted me in the sense of, I was always reading, like, our literature is really heavy for someone who is, for example, high school. Like, I was reading in high school Dostoevsky and all this kind of war literature with horrific scenes. They were in my head. Like, I really need to say this because it's just a strong scene. It's like there is a poem from a Croatian artist where he describes there were Nazi pits where they would push people and put I don't know the English word, but it's calcium oxide. I don't know the English word for this. It's burning the skin basically. And then they would put like a needle through people's ears so that when they move, they would feel each other and they shouldn't move. And then they would push them in this pit. And you know, you're like 13, 14 years old and you're reading this and that's part of your literature. So you grow up with these images that are really like, I feel them like they're like these, you know, ghosts in my head, which they form me. But I feel like it's like in the Beautiful Life from Bernini. If you are protected from these images by the nurturer, by the parent, I feel like they don't impact you as much. And I think because of what happened in my life, my parents were scared themselves because they were hurt. They had a tragedy. So it was difficult for them to hold this tragedy as well. So I wasn't protected emotionally, although I was physically really safe. So physically, I had the house, even when the bombing was in 1999. I didn't really like hear the bombs. There is only one strong memory because my dad is a military person. There was one strong memory of like he had to leave and I saw things flashing on the sky and there was the fear of, well, maybe I would lose my dad if something happens. So it's this definitely impacted me, but I think I wasn't aware that it was not what scared me. It was not what was my fear of pain, where it was coming from. So I think it changed real understanding that the pain I was carrying was much further away. It wasn't in the war. It wasn't in those events.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here realizing until I was about 15, I thought that wars were something that happened to old people, like my grandparents who went through the World War. And yeah, I was very sheltered from all of that. So that separation that you talk about, I'm just aware that I had that as you're speaking.
I mean, that's another thing. There are so many layers because even I was separated. You know, that I was shielded and I was in it. And I know we will maybe talk about privilege, but I always, when I think about this, I always had in the back of my mind, I was so privileged in this situation. Because I was living in a very small town far away from the city where the major things were happening. So I always have in the back of my mind how much I've got, how grateful I am for being where I was, although I was still in the field of this happening.
Well, why don't we talk about that? What are you referring to by privilege? Like, what is privilege? And the other part of that question is, what is your experience of power in your life?
I did think about that a little bit as well. I don't really have a fully formed answer, to be honest. I feel like privilege, if I'm just to look at the definition, is you have someone in a privileged position has more access to something than a person that is not in a privileged position. And if I'm talking about my case in the war, because my dad was in the military, he would just send us somewhere else and that was safe in a way. So I felt like I wasn't in the epicenter of everything that was happening. I was shielded, and I feel that is a privilege to be able to move away and to be shielded in such a difficult time and position.
Right, because that's also the privilege of having access to information and the privilege of having mobility, right?
Yes, I think the privilege of having mobility. I think my privilege didn't really come from my dad being in the military. I think it really just came from the geographic location we were in. And the fact that my dad he was a doctor, so he was not invited to the battlefield. And that was really incredible for me because he didn't lose his life. He was kind of always in the back handling what was happening. But then there's that part of privilege, but then there's this part of not being privileged because my dad was carrying the pain. And, I would be in a car with people from the military, and there would be stories like they would talk about killing people as if it's like the most normal thing in the world. And then on the next second, they would talk about how sad they are that a horse couldn't go up the mountain in the same context. And you realize what happens to people in these situations and how they react and how dehumanizing the whole experience is. So it's always, for me, it's always inside of me, is always displayed between privilege and not privilege. And actually, what I actually wanted to say is that thinking about privilege, sometimes I feel maybe it's also preventing healing, even for privileged people. Because someone who is intentionally withholding information that gives access to privilege, I don't think they can be happy themselves. I don't think it's a nice place. So, and that's why I feel like maybe we are, by constantly having this strong word, maybe we are actually not even granting some healing for people that we call they're privileged. Because for most of my life, thinking I'm privileged, I wasn't seeking help. Even psychotherapists would tell me, psychologists would tell me, you have no problems. Like, I don't know why are you here when I was in Serbia, because in Serbia, I was kind of a little bit better than the average. Like, my dad was not alcoholic, woohoo, so I have no right to complain, So I think I wish there would be this understanding that pain is pain for every human, and we create privilege out of pain. And I'd rather a privileged person just be allowed also to have pain, and when they resolve it, that privilege will disappear. That's what I felt. But I am still really not 100% formed in these opinions, because I just haven't, I'm always in the middle. Like, sometimes I'm privileged, sometimes I'm really, really not privileged, and I know how it feels. And I'm always having in my head, think about what's below, think about what's above, and I'm always thinking about both sides. So it's very difficult for me to play with this concept, I have to say.
I think it's interesting about what you were saying about those who hold privilege. I was just thinking in Gestalt terms, it's like when it becomes fixed, it's limiting.
Exactly.
And I've seen that when, negotiations start to happen where someone or a group of people who hold privilege are asked to just, give some of it away.
Mhm.
It is terrifying. And there's all of this fragility and cracking and breaking and pain. And it's, wow, that's really fixed. It's not free at all.
Yes.
To have privilege unless you're able to give it away.
Yes.
So
exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. And it's also, I think, access to things, which we call privilege, doesn't necessarily need to be held. So sometimes I think if we are aware that we are in a privileged position, it doesn't immediately mean we are privileged. Because I can be in a privileged position and still want to grant access to the knowledge I have. I might not always have the capacity of time or way to reach, but I have it in my mind and I'm having my eyes open. So when there is an opportunity, I want to share.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I think it's definitely sometimes it's passing, sometimes it's temporary, but
yes,
some privileges are so fixed. I mean, they're
yes,
like part of intergenerational systems, right? So
absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, those fixed privileges are trauma responses. And I love trauma response because it explains so many things to me. But yeah,
yeah, I just imagine that with food. It's like that someone who's experienced hunger, they're not going to let go of the food.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so what about a different aspect of yourself? How about gender? How have you come to understand and experience yourself in
Ooh.
terms of gender, womanhood, femininity, whatever you like?
Ooh. I mean, I am experiencing gender with a lot of rage. Like, if you ask me this, I'm enraged, like deeply enraged, like pissed. um, uh, I've grown up in a very patriarchal society, and a friend of mine described me like, you're this incredible mind that has been bred to be a housewife and a cleaning lady.
That's a pisser.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like that's what I was. I was someone who has these capacities, who was constantly punishing myself that I'm not a housewife. And I was literally a patriarchal woman, and I wasn't really aware of this until I went to Switzerland to do my PhD. And I would say sentences which would make my female friends who have studied in the US or are just 7 to 10 years older than me and a bit more developed, they would make them appalled. They would be appalled. Like, I would call women hysterical. And I would think that, a woman cannot be a good boss, because that's what even women sometimes in Serbia would tell me. And they became my values, and I knew always that this is not the case, because I was like, I'm a woman, and I'm not like this. So I was always trying to play a man, and I was always kind of going into, like, I was healing men. Like, it was so ridiculous. My whole history with my own femininity, it's just really sad to me to look at, because I was literally trying to be a man the whole time. I mean, I didn't accept the fact that I'm a cyclical creature, that like, I'm not the same like others, that cycle entails the fact that there will be days where I won't be able to work as efficiently, but that's not even necessary, because on days where I can work efficiently, I will work really well. On the other days, I will just do something else in a different way. It doesn't have to be always the same way. And there is something about intuition as well, that, if you constantly work, you don't have the time to sit down, listen to your intuition, and do less, because you give yourself space to actually process the informations you gain. So it was a mess, honestly. I still am searching for my integrating really and having a strong feminine, because I was literally a man. Like, I was behaving as a man. And again, the impact of my dad thinking he will have a son. I turned out to be a daughter that was trained as a son. I played handball. I was running. I was always doing very, very masculine sports. And even now, I'm in a boys' club. Science is still a boys' club. And it's very sad to see that. I mean, so, and also, like, being hit hit on from people telling me like, oh, le petit serpe, and like, you know, like this kind of sentences from people that are 30 years older than me, thinking that they can own me. It's really appalling. It's really like, so there is a lot of rage, and that's why I don't have formed thoughts. I think
Those are very formed thoughts.
yeah.
Those are formed.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, again, I am not blaming anyone here. I think we both need to heal, like both genders need healing. Women have been, I feel like, running away from our nature for a long time because we try to fit in a mold that is just not us. I think men have PTSD still from all the wars we've been through. It's just 40 years since we came out, or 50 since we came out of wars. So we have a lot of healing to do. And I think patriarchy is honestly just a PTSD from wars. It's like just people that, I mean, it's difficult. War is horrible. It's dehumanizing. It really needs you to shut down emotions, because if you don't shut down, you kill yourself instead of killing someone else. So I feel like there is this collective healing that needs to happen for all of us, and that's why I think has happened for my country, and that's why it's so strongly patriarchal, because it's not a good thing to kill another human being. Even though we think we are tribal and all of these things, I don't think anyone who does damage to another human being really can feel good unless it's a psychopath, unless, like, you know, it's a personality disorder, which is very, very.
You think it is something that would change a person?
Exactly. I'm sure. I mean, I'm always thinking about people who are driving trains, and for them it's part of their job that they actually hit people. I mean, that it's almost like they take it as part of the job, and I don't think it can be an easy life to know that this can happen. And it's clear when this happens to them, it changes their life. So I think it's really a trauma to do something difficult to another human being. We're just social beings. So that's why I feel like gender, unfortunately, is a divisive word. I wish we could sit around the table and have a conversation about the pain rather than about gender.
And maybe this is another way of dividing people, but I'm curious about age and how you see your chronological self and how you're experiencing sort of that continuum of change.
I'm thinking about the tree, and you know, it has this. I don't know the English word for the circles.
The rings on the tree.
The rings, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like we are always all of our ages, and we react from all of our ages. So I have another metaphor, which is the babushka. So, you know, you open and you get to the smallest one, but when you close it all together, it's like, yeah. And this might not mine, it was my first therapist that gave me this, and she opened it up and she told me, when you're talking to someone, just see maybe if you can analyze which is the place he's talking to you or she's talking to you from. So I feel like the end point is I'm 31, but I think everything before that is in me. And if I would go into some esoteric, probably everything after that is somehow also in me, which I don't have the words for, but I guess it's very holographic how I experience age.
I love that. That is a beautifully cultural representation, and it's very graphic. It's, yeah. Interesting. Okay. So what about Gestalt. Where did you find that? How did that happen for you?
So that's interesting. It was my sister who is not in Gestalt therapy or is not as actively as me. So I had a therapist, and it was a very destabilizing experience, who was not a Gestalt therapist. Then my sister told me, well, I'm going to a Gestalt therapist. And I was like, what Gestalt? And because I was always the one who is interested in therapy and psychology, but I had no idea what it is. So she was like, yeah, he asks me, how does this impact you? And if we stop and if I move and you move, how does this work? And I was like, yes, this sounds really good. So like, give me like 3 numbers of 3 therapists and I'll call them and I see with whom I can work. And then I literally started my therapy with my current therapist. And I mean, honestly, I'm in love. It's like, and it's lasting for 3 years now. And I think I'm starting to see the real person, and the real person is still equally cool. And then like with my therapist, again, she was one of these people like that was not inhibiting me. And so she would give me all these books, and she would not like, she would share her whole library with me, and I would eat them for breakfast, basically.
Oh, you mean she didn't have to be smarter than her client?
Yeah, imagine. Exactly. So yeah, she would just constantly feed me with whatever, and she would be like, yeah, what you can maybe this and this and this. And then actually she introduced me to your podcast. Like I wouldn't know it, and she was like, there's this lady that is doing interview with Gestalt therapist, and I think I've ended up listening probably more than her, but it was just she gave me, and I've done it. So I think everything started with her, but then I had this insatiable curiosity, and it was just pulling me in, and more and more and more and more and more. And the more I know, the more I want to know, and it just feels never ending. And it's really
And so
beautiful.
what are you finding? Like what pulls you in? What are those Gestalt things?
One thing that pulled me in from watching the interviews was just the type of people that are in the field. And it was very liberating, because I always was a very holistic person. I never thought like, I'm a scientist and I can't be anything else, and this is like the only thing I have to do in my life. And I always felt so closed whenever I approached this thought of just being a scientist. I would be like, oh my God, if I have to stay this. And this thing of like commitment and giving up things for science, sacrifice. And I was like, I can't do that. So then when I was listening to the interviews, I was just listening to these people who would say, well, I'm a classical or jazz pianist, and then I'm a therapist, and then I'm I don't know, I'm painting and I'm doing this. And I was like, you can do that? Like, this is okay? And you can be part of society. So I think this was really the part of the interviews that was like, this field has this kind of people, and I can be part of that. And I know they don't know me, but I mean, it just feels like my community. It just feels like a group of people that I really want to be a part of. And then another thing about Gestalt is the awareness of the here and now, and the presence. And this is just, for me, I don't know if Gestalt has this idea, because I don't know enough of the theory, but this idea that you can recreate yourself with every breath. And understanding when you can't, what is fixed, and how to make it softer. And my sister told me, like, her therapist asked her, do you want me to be direct, or do you want to massage it a little bit? So I think this massaging is so nice, and I think Gestalt has that beautiful way of massaging people into release. And I really want to learn that, because I was brought up, like, as I said, my dad was a military person that by the structure of his personality he was not a military person. So it was such a collide in him, which I think I took over as well, as having like this split in a way. And I think that's what Gestalt brought me, like a way of massaging myself into release, into expressing the world without a structure. And this is something that was just beautiful.
I think it might come back to the very first thing you said, which is, I am this and. Because it's not that releasing or, recreating yourself in the moment means that you aren't any of that anymore. It's another layer on
Yes.
top of another layer on top of another layer.
Yes.
So I know you said you're a young Gestalt student, but what are some of the challenges that you have run into in your experiences with Gestalt, either as a client, as a student, as a practitioner? I don't know where you are on that, but what are the challenges?
I don't know if this is specific to Gestalt. I think it might be just specific to our way of educating people, but the challenges I'm always encountering is when I need to do something in order to prove that I'm good at it. And being asked to write an essay when I don't really want to write about this now, because I don't know, awareness is not what I want to write about now. I just want to write about death. And at this moment, that's figural for me. And why do I need to write about awareness? And is this, I always feel such a resistance when there is that structure, because then I feel like, how do we learn people to express themselves if we're giving them a mold that they need to fit in? And I know that, and I think it was Bob Hendrick in one of the groups, he said, it sounds like a booth camp. And the booth camp is only good when there's a war. But we are away from wars for years now, but we still behave that we are as if we are schooling people to go to a war. Like they need to be somehow very squared. And so I think what I'm missing.
Yeah, I think it's that sort of education as indoctrination.
Yes.
Through interjection versus education as, following your interest in a creative process kind of way. Exactly.
And I always keep in mind the polarities. So I always think about structure is important. I mean, that's another thing. I'm a very structured person. Like if you would see my handwriting, the organization in my computer, everything is up in folders. Like even my pictures are like this beautiful day, 2021, this date, and so I really love structure. I think it holds creativity. Like without structure, creativity can be very useless. So it's really important to have a structure that holds us. But I'm always on the edge. How do you combine them in a way that we don't take away from people? Because a really funny thing was for me in my school was when I asked for a prolongation of an essay, I was told, well, you're not sick and there is no death. And I'm like, so until we reach sickness or death, we're not excused. And I'm like, how do we teach therapists to take care of themselves when the only excuse for not doing things are sickness and death?
Yeah, I think life is usually a pretty good excuse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, I wish we could have that kind of compassion to know that we don't want to get to sickness, death in any extreme in order to stop ourselves. So I feel like I'd rather want to be responsible to myself and others and say, well, I'm predicting that I'm not going to be the best of myself. I can't deliver this now. And that should be kind of okay. So those are the things that I'm still struggling. And I don't know, I've never been a boss. I've never been a director of anything. So maybe when my role changes, I won't be as flexible as I'm as I'm now when I'm at this part of the hierarchy. And that's why I know that structure has to be held. So it's really, I'm still a little bit, again, exploring this, and I'm not really sure what the
Well,
good way.
it sounds like it comes back to that, what you said about art, which is whether you're in the process or whether you want a product.
Yes.
And I think as a student, you're going through a standardized product production process.
Yes.
And it was much more process oriented when it was, a bunch of people trying to figure out what Gestalt is. But I don't know, I really don't know why it has to stop being that. I don't think that every group of Gestalt students has to come to the same conclusion about what it is, or find the same pieces of the theory the most moving or the most interesting. And I had a great conversation about this with Marguerite Koenig. And I mean, she took it from her experience with Laura that that's not how groups used to be structured, but now it's gone into the sort of educational assembly line model.
Yeah.
And this is how to make a therapist.
What is scary for me there is, how will that therapist ever be able to be with a client who is creative and their own, because there will be always this urge.
That should be every client. Every client is creative and is an individual.
Exactly. And so how we will allow people to not comply when we haven't allowed it for ourselves. And this is for me, and I always feel like we can liberate others as much as we are free ourselves. So it's like, if I can't find a way for myself to exist in this so that it really feels free, then I'm really not sure how I can work with clients. And I'm still really sitting with that question. I'm a little bit lost in it still.
Well, I think we should all sit with that, because what you're talking about also sounds like trauma-informed learning, not just looking at traumatized students, but understanding how our own trauma and the trauma of the people who taught us shaped what we know it, how we learn it, and how we teach it.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of the need for structure comes as a trauma response, like you said.
Yes.
So those are some of the challenges and some of the questions. What has it given you? How has Gestalt therapy affected you, and what stays with you?
A rich life, like a life where I'm living every day as if it's a new life. Like, I mean, it's impossible. There's this word, it's called ineffable, when you can't put things into words. It's ineffable to describe what Gestalt has given me, because it's as if I'm living, as if I have taken a psychedelic drug, but I haven't taken it. It's like my therapist and me, and she was able to really help me to reach this stage where literally I can really smell wine there. I can see the grapes, then I can taste it. I can feel the extraction. I can feel the fruitiness, and then I can swallow it. And then it's so slow. And yesterday I was smelling an essential oil. I was like, as if I've never seen it before. And it's every day like this. And it's for every day, it's for something different. And for example, also today, my grandpa died. And I felt
Sorry.
It was, yeah. I mean, I'm not smiling because it's but I'm smiling because of what I experienced. I was sitting and it was pure pain. It was me, my pain, and tears, and it was pure. It wasn't resistance. It wasn't like I wanted to be different. There was not voice saying this is unfair. it was just pure pain. And it was really, and I think I've gotten that. I think it's a combination. I don't want to fully put it on Gestalt. It was a combination of Gestalt and the way my therapist thinks and lives, and possibly me, who has contributed with my personality and my drive for life. But it's this place where we are here and we know we're not going to be here forever. And when we are here, we live a full life, even when there's pain. And I think there's no money that can buy that. Like,
I get that similar learning through the lens of Buddhism, of acceptance and not trying to change the experience and not putting a value judgment on it.
no.
And just noticing the intensity and, like you said, the purity of a very deep experience.
And I'm also thinking that purity is the purity of the love we experienced. And I was just thinking this morning of how much love there was, so that there will be so much pain. And so I always feel like I don't want to take any of those away. But I'm always thinking again about privileges. There's pain, and there's really difficult pain. And I also understand when some people just don't want to take that pain because it's really big. So I always think about these, but for me today, I could feel it purely and be with it.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And I don't want to change your day. I mean, that is what there is today, right? So I am also curious about going forward, because you're starting something. And I want to know what a Gestalt community is for you and how you see that developing in, with, around, because of you going forward.
So I can say what kind of community I want. I think I'm kind of forming it now. I feel like I'm just beginning. And I feel like I belong to Gestalt, although, as I said, no one knows me, because I just feel all these people as we touched each other, and maybe they don't know how I touched them, but they touched me. So there was a contact. So I do feel like there is a community already, but just by the fact that there are these people in the field of Gestalt. But what I would definitely like, and I'm always this kind of, I'm coming from a communist country, so I really like things to be rosy, and that we are all one big group of people that can communicate differences.
That's what communism was like, really?
There was a part of it when it was working, where it was working nicely for some things. And I can talk about that if there's space, but maybe we don't want to go there. But I always have this idea of like, why do we need to split in camps? Why do we need to split this whole and do this, constantly doing this? And I because differences are nice, and we can communicate through them. So yeah, I have this wish that we can somehow come together. But also I definitely want a community where there's this openness and sharing and exchange, and a way of like, I really don't want people to cite me when I say something. And this is something that I wish even in science, because this is privilege and this is owning information. I find it really ridiculous to say, Heather said this 2021, because what we say comes from how we are impacted by another, and what we say comes from 3,000 years back. And I read in one book about writing, the only original story is the one of Adam and Eve, and everything else is just our flavor of it. So I just wish there is a community where we can exchange ideas, write them down, and in a very informal way where we don't need to own the words. And I don't know how to do that because, again, structure, and maybe it's not practical, and maybe we cannot make money out of it. And all this is just the idealist in me speaking. But I just really want exchange and a way of growing together without needing to cite when that event happened, because if it happened because of me, then you will pay me and not the other guy. So
that's interesting. It's sort of taking the individualism and the proprietorship out.
yes, yes,
The
but
ownership.
not abolishing individualism. I mean, I think individualism is important. Uniqueness is important, because again, coming from a communist regime, I was always pushing myself to be equal as everyone else, and I was really different. So it was almost torturing myself to fit into something I'm not. So I think in uniqueness and appreciating the uniqueness of every human being and not equalizing something that's not equal to start with is really important. But then also, again, having this idea that if I'm born in a white room, I would not have those ideas I have now, because I am impacted by everything that everyone has done before me and next to me. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge and be aware of that, and always be aware that if we are talking about my idea, it's always coming from this conversation I once had with this person, and then this person, and then this person, and it's just my synthesis. But it's not, it doesn't belong to me. I'm in service, but it doesn't belong to me.
Yeah, I do agree that knowledge is definitely going to try and sound like Dan Bloom. Knowledge is a co-created field phenomenon.
Yes. I was lacking those words, but it's exactly this. Yes.
There you go. They're not Dan's. I'm just borrowing something Dan-ish, right? Yeah. So that's about the community. But what do you think you would like to do with Gestalt? Personally, professionally, artistically, I don't know.
Oh, so many things. So I would, first of all, I would like to have the chance to actually finish the training, because I'm really afraid, because I really want to keep my science. My science is the most important thing, really important thing for me. And because of this lack of flexibility in the education system, I'm so afraid I won't be able to. And I know I can contribute so much, but then if there is no flexibility, maybe I won't be able to. So it's really, I'm a little bit torn, but knowing myself, I always finish what they start. So I'll definitely find a way. So when I finish, I definitely want to work with people. They just find me interesting to work with. I don't have a group of people in mind. I think I had very difficult experiences, and I think these can really be put into service of others, of empowering people who might be in the same situation, going through some narcissistic or borderline abuse. And these are things I want to talk about as well. That's part where I really want to use the psychotherapeutic skills which I would gain through this process. And then there's a part where I really want to bring this into my science. I really want to have a group if I get to that place where I'm leading a group of scientists, and do science in a Gestalt way. Include these experiments, co-create things in a Gestalt way, and trying to liberate the creativity using the exercises I've learned in my training. And maybe one day, you know, being a director of an institute of science where we all work like this, where science is not this, you know, very rigid, competitive place, but where we are co-creating together in a more sustainable manner. Because in science, there is a lot of burnout, and there is a lot of, again, boys' clubs. And I really hope that all this knowledge that I gained in this space will eventually be put to some use. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I'm seeing like a line of clients in my mind, and actually they're all men. But I've learned so much from them as architects, engineers, biochemical engineers, how creative those processes are, and that there is not that artificial division between hard and soft.
No.
And that those creative, discovering, inventive, sort of that ingenuity is incredible.
Yeah. I mean,
it has to be given the right support.
Absolutely. Oh, yes, exactly. I mean, it really needs the support. And there is a guy, Louis Cozzolino, who is not Gestaltist, but is a Gestaltist. He doesn't know it. But he said, he talks in his book about poet scientists. And I think that's what we are constantly doing. I mean, science is just another language. It has a structure, but even in that language, we can break the structure. And how to break the structure is basically what we're learning as psychotherapists. Because if we never break the structure in science, there are no discoveries. It's really, really boring. I mean, I don't want to do that kind of science myself.
That sounds like quite an ambitious project. I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean,
excited.
I just hope it doesn't break me, but I hope it makes me and doesn't break me.
Maybe it'll break you in interesting ways, and you'll put yourself back together, and it'll be more energy efficient in a new configuration or something.
True, that's true.
Okay. Well, is there anything that you would like to add at this point?
I think I'm very grateful that I was able to talk about war. It's not something that many people want to sit with. So I just wanted to thank you for that, because I always crave the space to just say to people, like, you know, it was just 20 years ago and it happened to my whole generation. And I just really am grateful that that's acknowledged and seen. So that's the only thing I wanted to add.
Thank you. Yeah, I like sitting with some of the darker sides of the conversations too, you know, death and war and trauma. I don't know why that's comfortable. I should probably work on that in therapy, but I really appreciate your sharing, and I enjoy speaking with you very much, and I look forward to whatever comes of all of our little collaborations in the future. And I can't wait to see who you interview. So welcome to the project. And
I'm curious as well.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we leave this one here? Okay.
Yeah.